Welcome back to Tech Talk. So, there's this really big secret about Steve Jobs that no one's ever known before, but I now have the inside scoop. Hey, Mitch, what's wrong?
Well, Final Cut Pro X sucks.
Are you talking about Final Cut Pro 10?
X, 10,
10?
What's the difference? It's a Roman numeral.
Apparently, and it's not very exciting for you, is it?
No, it's a horrible piece of programming. My God, I can't believe Apple released something like that.
All right, well, let's figure this out, because I kind of like Final Cut Pro 10, but everyone keeps saying ever since it came out that it was crapware, and I want to know, why is it so bad for you? Have you tried it?
Yes, I have tried it. I actually downloaded it the day it came out, got extremely pissed off at it, and deleted it, and got a refund.
You did get the refund?
Yeah, I did get the refund.
Okay. Now, you've been using Final Cut Pro 7 a lot longer than I have. I've only been using it for like 2 years.
Yeah.
And I'm still really curious because 10 certainly looks a lot better than 7 does visually, right?
Well, yeah,
I mean,
of course it looks
it's pretty,
visually
and
better.
iMovie like, ooh.
But
what's wrong?
Programs don't need to be visually pretty, to be honest with you. They need to be practical and useful. And while Final Cut Pro X does have the magnetic timeline and the auto rendering feature, which is really, really nice,
Mm-hmm.
it just gets rid of all of the great things that were great in Final Cut Pro 7.
I guess so. I mean, for me, when I started it, I uninstalled Final Cut Pro 7 and tried 10, and I admit it was really hard because there was no tutorials or anything like that on Lynda at the time. I had to pretty much relearn everything, unlearn a lot of stuff from 7, but I found that there's a lot of things in 10 that actually make it really easy to do a lot of the stuff that was hard before. And I can think of only very, very few features that 10 cannot do that 7 could do. Like, granted, no multicam.
Yeah.
You use multicam a lot, I'm sure.
Yeah, multicam's a huge feature, especially if you are using, multiple cameras and you're trying to sync everything up. So why would you get rid of something like that?
Maybe there's something that... I think Apple said that multicam is going to be coming soon to a future update of Final Cut 10.
Well, okay,
Yeah.
but here's the thing. If you don't release it when it comes out, why release it later? It's like saying, oh, here's the coolest thing known to mankind, but we're only going to give you 10% of it.
Okay. On the other hand, I mean, Apple kind of done this before, right? So we had, in 2007, Apple released iMovie 08. They completely rewrote iMovie.
Yeah.
Everyone screamed bloody murder because it axed a lot of the old features that iMovie HD had.
Yeah.
But now, a couple years later, we're in iMovie 11, almost all of the old features have returned in new versions. And a lot of the things that Apple kind of started doing new things in, like skimming and various other interface elements in iMovie, they brought over to Final Cut.
But let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
If you're a pro, like you're working in Hollywood, which
Mhm.
Final Cut is a big thing in Hollywood, why would you downgrade your software when you get the newest version?
I can agree with that. And
So, I mean, as a film student here at American,
Mhm.
why would I bother with a version that does less and that isn't used in most major firms, instead of the older version, which is still used? I mean, why do I have to wait for 3 new installments to come out and pay another $800 for it? I mean, God, it's just like the iPhone.
I don't know about that. I do think that, first of all, Apple is probably going to release mainly free or cheap updates because it's a Mac App Store app whenever this happens. And I do think that Apple was stupid to kill Final Cut 7 right on the day they released Final Cut 10. Because it's a totally different app. It's 100% different how you do things.
Yeah.
But I do think that this actually has almost all the features you need to know. And I do think that if you're still have products that are in 7, you're going to have to stick with 7 and move to 10. It's going to be a gradual transition.
But like I said, gradual transition isn't what a pro product is for.
Mm-hmm.
That's what a consumer grade product's for. You can dupe someone to buying the same thing 8 times just with a few new features.
Well, but then again, we kind of saw this like 10 years ago with Mac OS 9 to Mac OS 10. That took a number of years to fully make the transition to a completely new operating system, which everyone, consumers and pros, have to rely on. You had different versions of apps. You had to deal with the classic environment for many, many years before OS 10 finally got to the point when you could use it and not have to worry about OS 9 anymore.
Well, unfortunately, I don't have any experience with anything before OS X, so...
Oh, you're a latecomer to the Apple party, huh?
Yeah, and I'm leaving the Apple party right now.
Oh, that sucks.
No, it doesn't. It's actually quite nice.
But you said you liked the magnetic timeline in 10. I mean...
Yes, I think the magnetic timeline's very, very great, especially when you're working with a lot of clips and a major complex thing. But the problem is that alone doesn't justify the amazingness of the software. So why bother with it? You know, why would I get one small feature and lose 100 new features or older features that were a lot better than this?
I think so. I mean, it's kind of interesting to figure out. And what do you think is going to actually happen? Do you think that people are really going to abandon Final Cut and go to like Avid or Premiere or something like that?
I think right now people are going to stick with 7. I know some companies have moved over to Adobe Premiere, and I'm honestly, that's the track I'm taking right now. I'm going to be switching over to Premiere soon for my own personal needs. But Final Cut 7 will stay with me, and if they ever do go back to the older system, but have all the new features, then yeah, maybe I might come back to Apple. But I know for right now, Apple has 100% lost my business because Final Cut was the main reason I switched to Apple, and since they've butchered the program, in my opinion, why stick with it?
My opinion is I think Final Cut 10 actually is a major change. I do think that Apple was hasty in changing it. I think that if Apple had released Final Cut 10 and under a completely different name, like the new Editista application or something, it was separate from Final Cut 7. It's like, we think this is the future of video editing. People would have thought, oh, this is so cool. But it wouldn't have considered it to be replacing what they had used before.
Yeah, but here's another thing that sort of bugs me about, and sort of going with what you said. The design change is so big that a person like me who's worked with 7 and has worked with other programs very similar to Final Cut 7, it's a huge difference. And not that a huge difference is a bad thing, but you want to transition to something like that. You don't want to just thunk, here's a completely new program. So why is it that this interface can't look like the older interface? And why can't it do the same functions? I mean, granted, you could say that, oh, well, Final Cut X is what, $399?
$299.
$299, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So, and the older Final Cut with the educational discount was still like $1,200.
$1,000, yeah.
$1,000. I paid $1,200 when I got
but,
it.
Yeah, it's a slow decline.
I mean,
taxes and stuff.
I mean, the price difference is huge. Yeah. So, I mean, it's understandable that they were trying to make a cheaper program that's more for the prosumer audience that's out there, and I'm fine with that. But don't call it Final Cut, and don't replace it with Final Cut.
Unfortunately, they did. Whether we like it or not, I still think that it's I personally think it's a really nice application. I only had 2 years working with Final Cut Pro 7, and I think that there were a lot of quirks and stuff that I never quite got used to having to work around in 7.
Such as what?
Rendering was kind of a big deal. I never got multicam to work because half the time my things would be in different formats, which wouldn't work with multicam. And I would think that whenever they implement this in 10, that won't be as big of an issue because some of the things that are in there. And I just kind of think that after kind of getting my head around the whole idea of the magnetic timeline and some of the ways that you can make edits without having to do keyframe dots all over the place, I eventually was able to really get my head around Final Cut 10. It's just really a completely different experience. I think that over time, eventually, we'll get to a point where it will be, evolve to the point where it makes up for a lot of the things that it's lacking, and it's going to be an alternate choice.
I agree with you on that, but the problem is when you release a professional program, it needs to be on day one, the correct program, and has all the features with new features from the previous program, unless the feature was 100% not used and everyone hated it.
So. And you could say it's that in some cases for some of the legacy support that it kills. I mean, no one really uses EDLs anymore, for example, and some of those other old features. But multicam is certainly an example. The tape support is still there, but it's much more limited compared to what 7 had.
Well, I mean, tape's being phased out anyway.
Well, certainly, but there are other things that's going to be brought up, and some of the new metaphors, the event library and the project library, completely require a whole rethinking of how you're going to manage your footage. I think it's better because we don't have to get the newbies to know how to set their capture scratch every time, but it's totally different in terms of how you're going to manage your stuff now. And in terms of how your file system's going to work.
But one other thing I'd like to point out is if you're also going to make a new program, why do you disable all support for the previous program?
That was a dick move.
That is horrible for people who want to go back and work on a new project. Let's say you're in the middle of one on 7 and then you go to 10 and you can't finish it. Or you have to uninstall X and then reinstall 7 and do all.
You can't have 7 and 10 installed at the same time, but it's still the fact that they're not selling it anymore and they're not going to offer full support.
Well, you still can get it if you get it by phone. They're still selling a few copies.
Overstocked. Apple says it's going to be gone in a little bit. So, Whatever. I guess our overall judgment is whether we like what Apple's done with Final Cut Pro 10 or not. They could have done a better job of releasing it. That said, I think it's worth a shot, especially particularly if you had not used Final Cut before. It's much better than it was. If you have used it, if you make your living off of it, then it's a pretty crappy transition for now, and you have to wait a little bit for it to get better. So,
true.
We'll see. I personally would suggest, if you want, have both. You can use 7, you can use 10, just install them. Don't partition your hard drive. Apple was stupid to say you have to do that. So,
I also like the big box it came in. You ever seen the original box? Had like the manuals. This big.
Environmentally friendliness, my friend.
Oh yeah,
environmentally friendliness.
The entire manual out.
Okay, so that's our thoughts on Final Cut Pro 10. Mitch is awesome in his editing, and he's our tech guy. So thanks for coming on. When we come, and we're gonna finish up the show with maybe some interesting special guests. I don't know. I've heard rumors, but I don't know. I'll find out when we come back. Stick around.